Welcome to our training on flammable and combustible liquids. Being able to recognize and properly handle flammable and combustible liquids is vital to preventing fires, explosions, and other emergencies both at home and in your workplace. This course will give you an overview of what you need to know to stay safe around flammable and combustible liquids. By the end of this course, you will be able to recognize flammable and combustible liquids and their dangers, recall safety procedures, identify proper storage methods, and recall housekeeping and other fire control measures to prevent fires and explosions. You probably already know that a fire needs four things to exist: fuel, oxygen, heat, and an uninterrupted chemical chain reaction. Flammable and combustible liquids tend to vaporize in the air. That means that they release vapors into the air around them. When the vapors are in high enough concentrations, they can become the fuel for a fire. The air that they are in includes oxygen. Think about what happens when you apply heat and start the chemical reaction involved in fire. If the air itself contains the fuel that the fire needs, how quickly could it spread? The answer is that it can spread very fast and can even explode before you have a chance to react. We classify flammable and combustible liquids by their flash point. A liquid's flash point is the lowest temperature at which it releases vapors into the air in a high enough concentration that they can ignite and fuel a fire. Temperatures hotter than the flash point cause more evaporation, making the liquid even more dangerous. It's unlikely that you will have to determine the flash point for a liquid. That is something that manufacturers will do. You do need to know what a flash point is and why it matters from a safety perspective. Exceeding the flash point temperature of a liquid makes it much more dangerous. We keep talking about flammable and combustible liquids together. You may be wondering, what's the difference? Flammable liquids have lower flash points than combustible liquids. In other words, they release vapors at lower temperatures than combustibles. That means ignition can happen at a lower temperature for flammable liquids. In fact, some flammable liquids will ignite or cause explosions at room temperature or in freezing conditions, especially when people are transferring them between containers, using them, or disposing of them. The dividing line between flammable and combustible liquids is 37.8 degrees Celsius, or about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Common combustible liquids include diesel fuel, motor oil, and kerosene. Oil-based paints often fall into the combustible liquid category too. Common flammable liquids include acetone, benzene, ethanol, and gasoline or petrol. Note that some agencies and organizations have different categorizations for flammable and combustible liquids. Select the link to see specific information. You should reference the specific classification relevant for your intended use of liquids.
Which liquid has the lower flash point temperature?
Flammable and combustible liquid vapors are often heavier than air. That means that they can vaporize from an open container and settle in low-lying areas, leading to large flash fires or explosions. Vapors can also travel to ignition sources, such as vapors that extend from a container of liquid to an open flame. This dangerous event is called a flashback. As an example, an open container of acetone on a shelf in a basement vaporizes. The vapors settle near the basement floor. When someone flips a switch to turn on the lights, the vapors in the air ignite in a flash fire. The fire quickly travels back to the container where the fire consumes the container and everything else on the shelf. Be aware that fire might not be the only hazard. Some flammable and combustible liquids, mists, and vapors are also toxic, corrosive, or otherwise hazardous. Flammable and combustible liquids can contribute to dangerous chemical reactions if they contact incompatible chemicals, such as oxidizers. Flammable and combustible liquids and their vapors may also present health hazards. If they contact your eyes or skin, they can cause irritation. They may also be toxic. For example, you may feel sick if you inhale, ingest, or get solvents on your skin. You may get a headache or feel lightheaded, dizzy, nauseated, or confused. You may experience mood changes, vomit, or have difficulty breathing after exposure to flammable solvents. The Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS, includes putting symbols on containers to indicate the hazards of their contents. These symbols are called pictograms. The GHS pictogram for flammable and combustible liquids is a flame inside a red diamond. Labels may also include the words flammable or combustible and safe use instructions. The signal words on labels are danger or warning to further inform you about their contents. Danger indicates a more serious risk than warning. For instance, flammable liquids that form ignitable vapors at workplace temperatures have danger on the label. The safety data sheet, or SDS, for a liquid will also indicate if it is flammable or combustible. It will also list any health effects and include information about safe handling practices and what to do in emergencies involving the liquid. The Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS, includes putting symbols on containers to indicate the hazards of their contents. These symbols are called pictograms. The GHS pictogram for flammable and combustible liquids is a flame inside a red diamond. Labels may also include the words flammable or combustible and safe use instructions. The signal words on labels are danger or warning to further inform you about their contents. Danger indicates a more serious risk than warning. For instance, flammable liquids that form ignitable vapors at workplace temperatures have danger on the label. The safety data sheet, or SDS, for a liquid will also indicate if it is flammable or combustible. It will also list any health effects and include information about safe handling practices and what to do in emergencies involving the liquid. On a container label, which of the following pictograms tells you that the contents are flammable? Use the appropriate classification and subclassification systems for flammable and combustible liquids in your region to determine specific safe handling, use, and storage requirements. Your workplace's flammable and combustible liquid safety procedures and storage systems were developed by qualified professionals who carefully analyzed what your facility generally contains in the way of flammable and combustible liquids. These procedures are designed to keep you safe, so be sure to follow them. Your job may not involve developing routine procedures or planning appropriate storage, but it is helpful to have a sense of whether liquids are being handled safely. Be aware of unsafe usage and storage. If you see something that looks like a problem, alert your supervisor or the appropriate person in your company. Select each component of fire for an explanation of how we can control it to prevent fires that involve flammable and combustible liquids. We've talked about the potential for different liquids to ignite. Some potential ignition sources, like open flames and cigarettes, are pretty obvious, and you can certainly see how a lightning strike could ignite a fire. But you might be surprised at the seriousness of some other ignition hazards, like static electricity. Friction also frequently generates enough heat to start a fire. Other ignition hazards include cutting, welding, grinding, radiant heat, electrical sparks, and mechanical sparks. Heat-producing chemical reactions can also ignite fires. Your company should have policies in place to keep these potential ignition sources away from flammable and combustible liquids. Some of these policies may be communicated by signs with warnings like flammable, keep fire away, or no smoking. Always follow your company's policies, however they are communicated, and use your common sense. Some ways to prevent ignition are obvious, such as not smoking around flammable liquids. But what can you do about static electricity? To answer this question, it helps to understand a little about static electricity. To put it in very simple terms, static is an electrical charge that is generated when two things move against each other. When static discharges, it can be an ignition source. For example, your shoes moving against the floor as you walk can generate static in your body. Then when you touch something, like a metal doorknob, the static discharges, and you may even feel or see a brief spark. If there were flammable or combustible vapors in the air, they could then ignite. Controls can help prevent static discharge. For example, some workplaces require people to wear electrostatic discharge shoes. Even liquids flowing through pipes or hoses can generate static without proper controls. Does it take a complicated technology to reduce static electricity risk? No, it just takes wire because metal conducts electricity. Electricity is just the flow of electrons from one point to another. If you connect objects with wire, electrons that move between the objects will travel through the wire instead of the air. Connecting two objects with bonding wire for this purpose is called bonding. You can also get static sparks between an object and the ground. To reduce this risk, create a metallic path between the object and the ground. This is called grounding. Bonding and grounding only work if you have an electrically continuous connection, such as one in which metal connects to metal. Always approach bonding and grounding with a plan and follow your company's procedures. As we've discussed, mechanical and electrical sparks are major ignition hazards. In fact, many pieces of electrical equipment, such as electrical disconnects and motors, routinely produce electrical arcing. One way to handle these hazards, of course, is to simply keep them away from flammable and combustible liquids. When electrical and mechanical equipment are in the same area, your employer may ask you to use special, intrinsically safe, and explosion-proof tools and equipment, such as non-sparking brass tools, forklifts, and other powered industrial trucks designed to prevent ignition, and electrical equipment designed to contain an internal explosion. In your workplace, some areas containing flammable and combustible liquids may be designated as hazardous or classified because their atmospheres are potentially ignitable. You need to use special precautions in these areas. As we've discussed, mechanical and electrical sparks are major ignition hazards. In fact, many pieces of electrical equipment, such as electrical disconnects and motors, routinely produce electrical arcing. One way to handle these hazards, of course, is to simply keep them away from flammable and combustible liquids. When electrical and mechanical equipment are in the same area, your employer may ask you to use special, intrinsically safe, and explosion-proof tools and equipment, such as non-sparking brass tools, forklifts, and other powered industrial trucks designed to prevent ignition, and electrical equipment designed to contain an internal explosion. In your workplace, some areas containing flammable and combustible liquids may be designated as hazardous or classified because their atmospheres are potentially ignitable. You need to use special precautions in these areas. What should you keep away from flammable and combustible liquids? Storage rooms for flammable and combustible materials have special features. They have ventilation systems that prevent flammable vapors from accumulating to unsafe levels, and they are liquid tight where the walls meet the floor. Store flammable and combustible liquids in these rooms and do not exceed the capacity limits set by your company. If you aren't sure if the amount of liquid in a storage room is safe, consult your supervisor about it. Keep storage rooms orderly and keep aisles clear. Doing so will reduce the chance that someone will accidentally spill liquids or damage containers. In the event of a fire, make sure it is easy to escape or fight the fire. Storage rooms should have fire protection systems, like overhead sprinklers and fire extinguishers. Ensure that these systems are functioning and that nothing in the room is blocking them. Keep storage rooms orderly and keep aisles clear. Doing so will reduce the chance that someone will accidentally spill liquids or damage containers. In the event of a fire, make sure it is easy to escape or fight the fire. Storage rooms should have fire protection systems, like overhead sprinklers and fire extinguishers. Ensure that these systems are functioning and that nothing in the room is blocking them. Cabinets storing flammable and combustible liquids should be conspicuously labeled, "Flammable, keep fire away." As with storage rooms, do your part to keep storage cabinets neat and orderly to avoid spills. How much flammable or combustible liquid can be outside of a storage room or cabinet in any given building or fire area? That depends on the liquid and the type of container it's in. It's important to also comply with applicable regulations. If you need a flammable or combustible liquid in your work area, limit the amount you have out to only the amount you need to perform the task or work a half or full shift. The more dangerous the liquid, the less you should have out at one time. Follow your company's policies. Remember that the less you have out, the safer you are. Keep what you have out to a minimum and always put it back in a storage room or cabinet as soon as you are done with it. If you need a container to hold a combustible or flammable liquid, choose one that has been designed and constructed to conform to the tests and regulations of reputable organizations. The container should also be certified as meeting those requirements by bearing the mark of a third-party independent testing organization, such as UL. If the manufacturer or distributor label on the original container includes any instructions for safe usage, follow them when you are using the liquid from a secondary container. If you don't know if a container is appropriate for the job at hand, don't use it without first consulting your supervisor or the appropriate safety professional at your workplace. Approved containers have several special safety features. Safety cans, for instance, often have spring-closing lids and spout covers to prevent vapor from escaping. If the liquid inside is exposed to fire, pressure will be created inside the can as the contents heat up. If the container were completely sealed, eventually the pressure would become stronger than the container, and the whole thing would explode, further fueling the fire with a highly flammable mixture spread over a large area. The lid on a safety can is designed to prevent this scenario by simply allowing the extra pressure to escape. It's not too different from the way a lot of tea kettles work. Never place flammable liquids inside small, unventilated spaces. A vehicle trunk or boot can get hot enough to cause container contents to vent. Many safety cans also have flame arrestor screens. These double-wire mesh screens make it less likely that the can's contents will ignite in the event of a fire by dissipating heat and preventing fire flashback into the can. Liquid transfer is an opportunity for liquids to spill and for vapors to mix with the air. It is best to only transfer flammable and combustible liquids by using safety cans, a closed piping system, an approved self-closing safety faucet, or a safety pump. These methods have special safety advantages. For instance, you are much less likely to spill a liquid using a safety pump or faucet than if you poured the liquid from one container into another. Remember to bond and ground your containers when you transfer flammable and combustible liquids. You can also minimize the rate and height at which you pour to reduce air mixing, splashing, and static charge. Do not fill containers completely full. Instead, leave free space to allow for liquids to expand without overflowing. If containers are too full, they may leak or rupture. You should keep what amount of flammable and combustible liquid in your work area? Be careful with flammable and combustible liquid containers, even if they seem empty. They may contain enough flammable or combustible liquid to create an explosion hazard. For example, even just about 14 milliliters or half a fluid ounce of liquid can give off enough vapor to form an explosive atmosphere in a 182-liter or 40-gallon drum. Small amounts of flammable and combustible liquids can easily be trapped in a seam or be present as a very thin film on the inner surface of containers or drums. Follow company procedures if containers must be fully emptied or rinsed. There can be environmental and hazardous waste concerns. Keep containers closed when you are not actively using them. To help prevent spills, close containers and put liquids back in the appropriate storage room or cabinet as soon as you are done using them. It's important that you know your company's procedures for reporting and cleaning up spills before you begin working. That way, if there is a spill, you know how to react and what to do and not do. Ask your supervisor if you have questions. Only employees who are qualified to clean up spills should do so. They have the training and knowledge to avoid hazards and exposures during cleanup efforts. Prompt cleanup by qualified people can help prevent hazard exposures and fast-spreading fires. Liquids can move quickly, and the materials they touch, such as wood, may absorb them, making them excellent fuel for fires even after liquids have been removed. Liquids can even leak under doors and down staircases. All of this means that prompt cleanup is vital. Large spills can present serious fire, explosion, and health hazards. Even the used cleanup materials themselves, such as rags or absorbent granules, become a fire hazard when saturated and may need to be handled as hazardous waste. If people outside your organization, such as firefighters, are responding to an emergency involving flammable and combustible liquids, make sure they are aware of the liquids involved and have relevant safety data sheets, SDSs. Again, qualified people have the training to handle large spills, including placing cleanup materials in appropriate, labeled, closed-top containers that are regularly emptied. It is better to prevent an incident than fix one after it occurs. That's why this lesson has stressed preventing fires from occurring, not putting them out. But it's impossible to guarantee that you'll never have a fire. Appropriate fire control devices, such as fire extinguishers and hoses, should be available where flammable and combustible liquids are stored. If you are near a fire extinguisher or hose and a fire breaks out, only try to extinguish the fire if you are properly trained to do so. Different types of fires, such as those that involve oil and grease versus those that involve wood, require specific types of fire extinguishers. If you don't know what you are doing, you could make the fire worse. Only employees who are what should clean up flammable or combustible. You should now be able to recognize flammable and combustible liquids and their dangers, recall safety procedures, identify proper storage methods, and recall housekeeping and other fire control measures to prevent fires and explosions.